Well, as we reported before the break, EPA unveiling a new proposed Waters of the U.S. rule, and one that EPA says is aimed to bring clarity to the rule. So Deputy Administrator David Fotouhi joining us this weekend to help us navigate this new proposal. Deputy Administrator, what exactly do you think this rule does to change the ruling and bring more clarity to WOTUS?
Absolutely. Well, it's great to be with you. We really emphasized here at the Trump EPA the need for farmers, ranchers, and all stakeholders to have clarity in terms of how broad or narrow federal regulation of waters is in this country. And so when we got here on day one, we started working on a proposed rule to bring that clarity and certainty to landowners across the country. And on Monday, we were able to announce a proposal that is consistent with the law, that provides needed clarity for the extent of federal regulation of waters, and that recognizes the primary jurisdiction of states and localities to regulate their land and water resources because they know their resources best. So what we've done is put out a proposal for 45 days of public comment, and we encourage your viewers to take a look at what we've released and to provide us with feedback. But we think we've really struck a good balance between protecting our nation's waters, but also ensuring that farmers, ranchers, row croppers have the ability to do their work that feeds Americans, that produces the fuel that Americans need in a way that does not add unnecessary regulatory burden to their day-to-day life.
Well, Deputy Administrator, really the only criticism that I've seen on the WOTUS announcement is EPA maybe overpromising on WOTUS clarity. So do you think this proposal overpromises, and how was this written to make sure that this version of the rule does not end up in a battle within the courts?
Yeah, absolutely. We have direction from the Supreme Court from a case called Sackett that came down a couple of years ago. And our view was that the Biden EPA did not faithfully implement that decision when they went back and revised the Waters of the U.S. rule previously. So we took a fresh look at all the critical issues and came up with a definition that we think fully implements the direction that the court gave to EPA and that the court gave to the Army Corps of Engineers, which is an agency that we co-wrote this rule with because they're the ones who are responsible for a lot of the implementation of this provision. And so we took a fresh look at those legal requirements and what the Supreme Court indicated in their decision, and tried to apply that in language that is easily understandable, that takes into account geographic differences across the country, differences in rainfall, differences in features like rivers and streams, and east of the Mississippi, very different from west of the Mississippi, to write one rule that could govern the country generally in a way that takes those differences into account, but that doesn't impose unnecessary burdens on individuals, on farmers, when they go about deciding if they need to get a permit or not.
Yeah, one reaction I saw is farmers and ranchers are no longer going to need a lawyer to understand this rule. It makes it that simple. But one thing this rule does is it mentions the exclusion of groundwater. Since groundwater has never been included in the definitions of waters of the U.S., has there been confusion or contention around that? Or what prompted EPA and the Army Corps to explicitly include its exclusion in this new WOTUS definition?
Well, you're exactly right. Groundwater has never been included within the scope of the waters of the United States. There are other authorities that EPA has, like the Safe Drinking Water Act, to protect sources of drinking water, groundwater sources of drinking water. It's never been part of this regulatory program, the waters of the U.S. We thought it was absolutely necessary to make that exemption clear as day in the proposal by including it as a standalone exclusion so that there would be no confusion about whether someone would need a permit for a discharge that could potentially impact groundwater. They might need to look at other authorities under their state. They might need to look at Safe Drinking Water Act authority, but we want it to be very clear that groundwater is not part of this program. The Clean Water Act is a surface water protection program. Groundwater is not implicated in that. And so based on some case law decisions that have been released over the last few years and other sort of general confusion that we've heard stakeholders mention, we thought it was incumbent on us to clarify that as clearly as we could.
Yeah, that's less for interpretation there. All right. Well, the proposed rule is now published in the Federal Register, which we know kicks off that 45-day comment period. So let's talk about timeline now. When would you like to see this rule finalized?
That's exactly right. We published the rule today, in fact, and it will be out in for public comment for 45 days. That will wrap up in early January, and then we will expeditiously review the many public comments that we're anticipating, take all of that feedback into account as we prepare our final action. And because we know that there's an absolute need for certainty and clarity here and one nationwide standard that can be applied across the country, this is a top priority for Administrator Zeldin and a top priority for me. And so we're hopeful that in the first few months of 2026, we can have a final rule out for the public.
All right, switching gears to the RFS. So the proposed renewable volume obligation points to record blending mandates for biomass-based diesel. That would be a huge domestic demand driver for soybeans, so important to our audience here. But that proposal was released by your agency in June. When could we see EPA finalize the RVOs, and will we see the increase in biomass-based diesel requirements from that 3.35 billion gallons in 2025 to 5.61 billion gallons in 2026, like EPA proposed back in June?
Yeah, we understand how important it is to get this exactly right. And from day one, Administrator Zeldin has been laser focused on ensuring that the RFS strikes the right balance and carries out our statutory obligation to set volumes, considering the factors that are in the Clean Air Act. And we think we are on track in our proposal. We recently issued a supplemental notice to propose potentially reallocating certain volumes that were implicated by our decisions on small refinery exemptions that were issued earlier this year, rather. And as you know, when we came to the agency here in January, we had an unprecedented backlog of small refinery exemptions that the Biden administration had failed to consider. We also had a program, a renewable fuel standard program, that was behind on setting volumes. So we've invested a lot of time and effort in the proposal that you just described, as well as the supplemental notice on reallocation of those SRE exempted volumes. That comment period just recently closed. And so we're looking at all the comments that we received on the initial proposal from the summer, as well as on the supplemental notice that we just issued, taking all of that on board and considering that when deciding how to set the final RVOs. And we are working expeditiously to do that because we know that the farmers across the country and all of the other stakeholders implicated by this program need certainty. So we are working expeditiously on that.
I know it's hard to nail down a timeline specifically, but are we talking winter, spring, realistically, considering that other time, that other comment period just ended? What are we talking as far as timeline goes?
Yeah, what I can say is that we're working expeditiously to provide that level of certainty. We know that we need to set these volumes so that all of the stakeholders that are implicated by this program can adjust and act accordingly and start meeting the standards that we set. So we are working as quickly as we can to take final action on that proposal.
All right. One more question on this. Reuters reporting this week that the administration is considering delaying the proposed cuts and incentives for imported biofuels amid pressure from U.S. refiners. That would be a change in the tone since June. So is that the case? And if so, why?
Well, what I can say now is that there are a lot of rumors and speculation about what we might or might not do with regard to our proposal. We can't prejudge the outcome of where we're going. We're still looking at all of the public comments. It's very frustrating, frankly, when a news agency like Reuters comes out and spreads rumors and innuendo about where we may or may not be going in a way that actually moves markets and causes commodity prices to be affected by that before we've even made a decision. So it's something that we are actively looking at. As you said, it was an integral part of our proposal. We've received a lot of public feedback on it that we are reviewing from stakeholders across the board, and we've made no final decisions yet on that issue, and it's irresponsible for Reuters to be speculating about that at this time.
Switching gears, in August, EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin announced a final action imposing no additional wastewater discharge regulations on meat and poultry processing facilities. At the end of the day, how could that action help lower food prices?
Absolutely. When we came in, we saw the need to provide additional certainty to those facilities. There was a Biden-era proposal that if we had finalized it, would have imposed millions, if not tens of millions of dollars in costs on those meat and poultry processing facilities for limited environmental benefit. And so when we came in, we took a fresh look at the proposal and the comments rather that had come in from the public on that and decided to go in a different direction. The administration across the board, including here at EPA under Administrator Zeldin's leadership, are looking for opportunities to reduce the cost of living on families across the country. And one way we saw an opportunity to do that was to not impose additional burdensome requirements on meat and poultry processing in a way that would raise grocery prices across the country at this critical time. So you're exactly right. We took that final action. We did it decisively, went in a different direction from the Biden administration, and we think that will absolutely have a positive impact on reducing grocery store prices for consumers.
Well, that's just one of many actions by EPA. And so to wrap up, EPA announced in March what your agency called the biggest deregulatory action in history. So out of the 31 actions announced, which do you think has the biggest positive impact on farmers and ranchers? And is there actually more to come?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things we've been focused on is reducing the cost of energy. And so many of our actions that we identified in March and have been pursuing throughout 2025 are aimed at reducing the cost of energy for consumers, for energy prices for farmers, for ranchers, for manufacturers, so that we can reduce those input costs and therefore reduce the costs of those products that folks produce, including the products that farmers that spend so much time and effort and energy ensuring that Americans have access to. So the Waters of the U.S. proposal is a prime example of that. It's designed to reduce the regulatory burden, the unnecessary illegal regulatory burden imposed by that program under prior iterations of that rule. We're undertaking a score of additional actions beyond those that were identified by Administrator Zeldin in March. We're really working across offices here at the agency. We've hit our stride. We're working across offices. We're working with other agencies in the federal government, USDA, with the Department of Energy, with the Interior Department to try to identify ways where we can help reduce those input costs for farmers and ranchers, because we know that that will ultimately result in a thriving agricultural sector in this country, which is a priority for the president, and also result in lower consumer prices, which we have to achieve.
Deputy Administrator David Fotouhi, thank you so much for joining us this weekend.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
All right, we need to take a quick break, and then USDA announcing another round of disaster aid. So what crops or what products are included, and what is the timeline to sign up for this disaster aid? We have the details next.